Hello and happy Canada Day. I'm Jill Sperling. Today we celebrate the 150th anniversary of our country's Confederation. Canada is steeped in history and tradition. And over the next half hour, we'll bring you stories of the people, the places, and the events in our region that have helped shape this great nation.
This presentation of Canada 150 in Kamloops is brought to you by Valley First, the home of free banking. Switch today and get $200.
Just double click here. Listen to me. Double click, not double click.
Double click!
Double click!
Double click!
Modern Family, 5 nights a week on City.
Welcome back. On April 9, 1917, Allied forces comprised mainly of Canadian troops stormed Vimy Ridge in northern France. It marked the first time all 4 Canadian Army divisions fought together as a unified force. A century later, Canadians gathered across the country to remember that moment and honor the brave men who sacrificed their lives on foreign soil.
On April 9, 1917, around 15,000 Canadian soldiers went over the top of their trenches and attacked the German lines at Hill 145.
It was Easter Monday when they attacked through the wind-driven snow and sleet.
The hill, which would come to be known as Vimy Ridge, would be captured that day.
From St. Paul Street to here is not a very far distance at all, but during that approximate distance, over 3,000 Canadian young men died.
It was the first time all 4 divisions of the Canadian Corps fought together as a unified Canadian force.
It brought the Army of Canada together as one, and still to this day, the Canadian Army has a world-famous reputation.
I think that's part of the reason that certainly over time this battle has become so significant in the Canadian cultural memory as sort of a symbol, I guess, of Canadian nationhood.
On the 100th anniversary of the battle, veterans and members of the public gathered to remember those who fought and died at Vimy Ridge, including here in Kamloops.
When you look at the names that fought at Vimy from Kamloops, that paid the ultimate sacrifice in Vimy from Kamloops, when you look at those names, you see that long before they went to Vimy, them and their families were the community builders of Kamloops as well.
We joined World War I in some ways as an extension of Britain. We gained a distinct reputation as shock troops during World War I, and that reputation, I think it made other countries sort of stand up and take notice.
World War I saw as many as 66,000 Canadians die and nearly 150,000 wounded. Remembering those who served and sacrificed at Vimy Ridge is one way to ensure tragedy on this scale is avoided in the future.
In the early 1900s, the community of Walhachin was home to hundreds of English settlers. The region was marketed as a land of plenty for both farming and leisure. Today, only around 24 people live in the remote settlement. We take a look at what led to a declining population and the pivotal role the now sleepy community played in the First World War.
65 kilometers west of Kamloops, all is quiet.
I used to tell people 29. They said, oh, 29,000? No, I said 29. Oh, 2,900? No, 29 people live here right now.
It's hard to believe a little over a century ago, more than 300 people lived in the community of Walhachin.
In 1908, William Barnes came here and decided to make this a little community. He advertised to the aristocratic Brits in England to come out here and buy 5 and 10 acre lots. They grew tobacco, corn, pears, apples.
Within a year, Walhachin was shipping thousands of pounds of produce to the local market. Life for the English was good.
They had a polo field, tennis courts. The Brits had their own dining room, smoking room. What we're standing in now, it was their dance hall. So again, party time.
Then came the First World War.
You had 107 able-bodied men living here, and of those, 97 enlisted and fought in the First World War.
Approximately 57 men died in battle. One of those men, Walhachin butcher Gordon Flowerdew.
He was mortally wounded in both legs. He continued to carry on and encourage his troops to carry on and to kill the enemy, and thus capture this key place on the road to Paris. He was told before he died that he had won the VC, which is the Victoria Cross, and it's a high honor to win for any soldier.
While pride in their men was high, the sudden shortage in labor, as well as the flume irrigation system collapsing, made running the orchard simply too difficult for those back home in Walhachin. In no time, crop supply began to dwindle, and by 1918, the last British aristocrat had left town.
Here are, I went just hiking down the bank, just in front of our house here. These are beds from the hotel.
Today, a large portion of retirees live in the community. Needham, as well long-term resident Flip Maccabee, proud to call the now historic town home.
My mom and dad, they were here, living here when I was born.
Many of the original Walhachin homes, including Needham's, remain standing. The bridge, grocery store, and dance hall that's since been turned into a museum also remain intact.
This is a whiskey of some sort.
These items, all that remain of a once thriving community, a community where everyday men became heroes. 97 of them just go and pick up and fight. We have to recognize what these Brits did for our country and for the world.
When we come back, a joining of two communities to create the Kamloops we know today. Stay with us.
Canada 150 in Kamloops. Brought to you by Valley First Credit Union. We'll be right back.
City's got game. The Price is Right. Weekdays at 10 on City.
Welcome back. While 2017 is a landmark year for Canada, it's also a landmark year for Kamloops. 50 years ago, in 1967, municipal leaders began the process of amalgamation. It would take 6 years for the city to take shape. And while there was plenty of friction, few can deny how important that process was to turn Kamloops into the city we know today.
50 years ago, the area we now call Kamloops was a collage of communities, each of them with different leaders and diverging visions of how planning and growth should take place in the future. The two big ones were the town of North Kamloops and the city of Kamloops, on either side of the Thompson River.
In 1965, the two councils met cordially with each other, Mayor Jack Chilton and Mayor Peter Wing and our councils, to see if there's something that couldn't be done with the city, because we were surrounded by other municipalities. And we had no place to expand. We had no place for infrastructure. We had no place for any of that stuff.
An exploratory citizens committee began meeting and concluded the merger would make city operations more efficient for taxpayers on both sides of the river. A few months later, that committee recommended the issue be put to a vote, and a referendum date was set for June 3rd, 1967.
Oh, that was a dandy.
The referendum result was a clear victory for the two councils, with nearly 75% voting in favor south of the river and 81% in favor in North Kamloops. Everything seemed to be going according to plan.
I think it was the cordial relationships that at start between the city of Kamloops and the town of North Kamloops that we had, and the two mayors.
Kamloops' appetite for growth wasn't satisfied yet, much to the chagrin of its neighbors. The newly formed council under Mayor Peter Wing was concerned about its future growth potential, and the prospect of a half-dozen different communities in such a small area, all with different services, didn't seem to make much sense.
There had to be some kind of a coming together to benefit everybody, and so they took that move, and it was really, I don't think, a hard stretch to make that happen.
Even so, the bedroom communities resisted, wishing to maintain their unique identities. In the years following the amalgamation of 1967, those bedroom communities began incorporating. Brocklehurst, Valley View, and Dufferin all became their own municipalities. And when Westside started considering its own move in that direction, the newly minted NDP provincial government, led by Dave Barrett, stepped in.
There was a lot of interest in Westside incorporating, so it would have been a totally ridiculous situation to have so many municipalities within such a small area.
A lot of people did not want a forced amalgamation, but to the credit of the Dave Barrett government, he made it happen.
In the case of Dufferin, Valley View, and Brocklehurst, those places never should have incorporated in the first place. It was a very parochial kind of situation, and people were arguing back and forth. But you can imagine everybody trying to get their own fire department and their own services, and none of it made any sense.
While there were a lot of bumps in the road, the steady leadership of Mayors Gordon Nicol and Al Thompson helped weather the rough patches of the mid-1970s. Now, few people see amalgamation as anything but positive for Kamloops.
There were so many problems with having all those municipal boundaries within what was essentially one community, or a lot of communities within one city, that it couldn't have gone on very long.
Canada is often celebrated for its diversity, as is Kamloops. In fact, the city has often blazed trails for the rest of the nation. In 1965, less than 20 years after Chinese immigrants were allowed citizenship, Peter Wing became the first mayor of Chinese descent in North America. His leadership was instrumental in shaping the city and paving a path for other minorities to pursue leadership roles. Peter Wing was not a likely candidate for mayor, born the son of Chinese immigrants in a country that would not accept him as citizen.
This is a family that wanted to establish itself in Canada at a time when Chinese are not welcome.
Wing's father journeyed to Kamloops in 1901. He would later take a wife and have 7 children, never knowing the eldest would one day make history. As a child, Wing attended Stewartwood Elementary, but unexpected illness brought his education to an abrupt end.
When he was about 13, he had to drop out of school and was kept at home convalescing for a year.
Here he is becoming a honorary Kiwanis.
Wing was never held back by a lack of schooling, pursuing any available opportunities.
He works as an orchardist for a long time, and then after he gets out of that, he gets actually into real estate, and so he works for a real estate corporation, and then I believe he's the owner of a real estate corporation before he starts to get into politics, and he's an alderman before he becomes mayor.
But first, there was the issue of citizenship. On July 1st, 1923, the Chinese Exclusion Act halted Chinese immigration and prevented those already in Canada from having the same rights as citizens. In 1947, the act was repealed, and Wing, who had spent his entire life in Canada, finally became a citizen. In 1960, Wing was elected alderman, and 5 years later, he ran for mayor.
Being a Chinese, I don't think entered into a lot, but I do remember him telling me when he ran, it was a concern for him at the very beginning that while he was accepted in Rotary and the different clubs, he wasn't too sure if he would be accepted in the public at large to vote for him and him to be mayor.
In January 1966, Wing took mayoral office.
He was so shy. That was his only problem, was he was so shy. And I think that's why he had me along, because then I was able to talk with him and calm him down and that sort of thing. But he was a true great friend.
They had the root band starting.
Lyle Anderson says that while his friend may have been shy, he was completely competent when it came to managing the city.
He was also a very sharp business person. And when we discussed it early on, it was suggested that he just pretend it's a business. And that's what it is. Oh, okay. That was it. From then on, he felt comfortable.
And in turn, his constituents felt comfortable having Wing as mayor.
His second term was by acclamation. No one would run against him.
He was a mayor that we admired. He was a mayor that we followed. He was a mayor that I said, showed his gentle nature, but had the intelligence to say, no, this is the way it should be done, and that's the way he was a good leader.
Wing retired from the mayor's position in 1972. The city would later name the Peter Wing Rotary Rose Garden in his honor. Wing would also receive both the Order of BC and Order of Canada. He passed away in 2007, laid to rest in the city that had embraced him, and leaving behind a legacy of leadership for those who would follow.
For us, then, it becomes a much easier job. I mean, when I first got on council, we had Councillor Leong, we had Councillor DeChico. last year I was on the first majority female council in the city of Kamloops. So, you know, these things are realities now, and these people blaze a trail for all of us.
Kamloops has a long sports history, one that dates back at least to our Confederation. The foundation for what would eventually become known as the tournament capital of Canada began with some rather non-traditional Canadian sports.
The first kind of record we have.
Sports in Kamloops goes back as far as Canada goes back, at least to our Confederation year in 1867.
Having informal competitions with running and jumping and wrestling. So that's kind of around actually when Canada gets started around. But in terms of the first sport, you know, that's informally known to have been played in Kamloops, the first sport with more formal rules, it was baseball.
Yeah, so baseball, we know that the first game was played in April of 1885.
Cricket, yeah, actually followed shortly after baseball. So cricket, baseball's in April, and cricket's actually, the first game is recorded as being played on July 18th, 1885. So this is May 24th, 1929, so this is probably one of the last cricket games that's played in Riverside Park. The next, I guess, introduction of a new sport seems to be polo in 1890. Polo got started here for a number of reasons. I think at that time there was a desire for British Columbia to attract middle and upper class immigrants from England specifically, and I think polo was a big part of that. Lacrosse is really interesting because we have some record of that getting started, of something forming around 1888. The person whose name is on the cup is actually Frederick J. Fulton, so he was a member of the Legislative Assembly at that time, but I'm not sure if it was through sponsorship or some other reason, but it's the Fulton Cup that teams in the area are vying for at that time. And Fulton and Company is the law firm that was started by him and still bears his name. So this is opening of the Kamloops Golf Club. And then actually used to have a much older Fulton, but he appears to be this fellow here. Golf was actually first played on Hillside Cemetery. So before it was a cemetery. Yeah, before it was a cemetery.
Hockey starts a little bit before tennis, so we know where the first hockey was. So a man named Alexander McLean, he flooded an area around the Thompson River.
The date we have for this is the 1920s, so there were women's hockey teams at that time as well.
So that's kind of where hockey kind of started. The first recorded game that we have, though, is from it was played on New Year's Day in 1902. Tennis started in Kamloops kind of the last year of the 1800s, so 1899 is kind of when there's a tennis club that formed in the region.
Basketball doesn't come into the scene a little bit more so until after the First World War.
The years 1867 to the 1930s laid the foundation for what is sports in Kamloops today. From the opening of Memorial Arena in the late 1940s, through the growth of baseball and hockey to the designation of Kamloops as the tournament capital of Canada, playing host to many provincial, national, and international championships and tournaments. Much of the history of sports in the last 150 years is now preserved at the Kamloops Museum, and in more recent years, the Kamloops Sports Hall of Fame at the Tournament Capital Center.
After the break, celebrating Canada as brand new citizens.
This presentation of Canada 150 in Kamloops is brought to you by Valley First, the home of free banking. We'll be right back.
Yeah, that's enough of that.
Welcome back. Celebrating Canada's 150th birthday is especially meaningful for one Kamloops family. The Heinen family just became Canadian citizens 1 month ago. They moved to Kamloops from Germany in 2011 and instantly fell in love with the community. Emigrating from Germany wasn't easy, but they couldn't be happier to be Canadian citizens.
12-year-old Lena Heinen is playing a familiar song on her accordion, a song that is especially important to her these days after becoming a Canadian citizen.
Some people were sort of like mean to me in Germany, and so there's a big difference here in Canada. I feel way more like welcome.
Lena, along with her two sisters, mother and father, were sworn in as Canadians in a special ceremony in Penticton last month.
That I will be faithful and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen.
6 years after arriving in Canada from Cologne, Germany.
When I got my certificate, it was like I got a new life.
Their new life really began in 2011 when Lena and her family got on a plane and immigrated to Canada after Lena's father was offered a job here. The family arrived in Kamloops sight unseen, but it was their chance at a new start.
When I looked down from the plane, then I could see mountains and lakes lakes in the mountains, and it was so cool. And I love when you go inside a store, then somebody already holds the door for you, and that's so kind and everything. And people are really polite here, and I love it here.
The move from Germany was especially difficult for her mother. Olga Heinen wanted to raise her family in Canada, a chance for better jobs, better schools, a better life.
Yeah, the language, yeah, I didn't speak any one word, yeah, and it was difficult.
But it didn't take long for the Heinen family to settle in. Olga learned English with help from Kamloops Immigrant Services and took courses online. Her children were enrolled in school and music lessons, the community quick to embrace them.
I was happy here from the first day.
8-year-old Emily was just 2 years old when her family arrived in Kamloops. Emily remembers nothing of her home country and may in fact be the most patriotic member of the family.
Well, I just got so excited that I'm just like, oh, I need to wear something Canadian. But one person in my class said, it's not Canada today, why are you wearing that? I'm like, well, I'm doing my interview today.
Emily's oldest sister, Juicy, was 16 years old when she left her home country and found the transition extremely difficult. But she made friends in school, learned to speak fluent English, and fell in love with one of the great Canadian winter sports.
I went skiing my first time in some peaks, and that changed everything. I was like, Mom, I will stay here forever. Because skiing was my dream. It was always my dream.
The family has no intention of ever leaving Kamloops. Their lives, jobs, and close friends are here. They love the kindness of the community and the opportunities ahead. And while they've spent 6 years on Canadian soil, Olga admits being officially sworn in as Canadian was indeed a defining moment.
It was so emotional feeling. I like Canadian very much. And I am now Canadian, so...
And that feels good?
It feels very good, more safe. I'm feeling more safe here now. I'm not just for visit here anymore.
Thank you for joining us for our celebration of Canada 150. I hope you've enjoyed taking a look at some of the events that have defined our region and our country. Have a great weekend and a very happy Canada Day.
Canada 150 in Kamloops. Brought to you by Valley First Credit Union.